sunshine, beaches, and bloodshed. Welcome to the Costa del Sol, a name once synonymous with paradise. But beneath the golden rays and glittering waves lurks a shadowy underworld that even the locals whisper about in fear for decades. This coastal stretch of southern Spain has attracted more than just sunseekers. It became a magnet for fugitives. Gangsters escaping the cold streets of Glasgow, Liverpool, and London, trading concrete jungles for palm trees, but among these criminal pilgrims, one group would stand out. Not for their numbers, but for their brutality: the Scottish Mafia. Born from turf wars back home, these Scottish crime lords didn't just come to hide, they came to conquer. Bringing with them a new brand of organized violence, a ruthless empire built on drugs, weapons, and murder. In this episode of the Crime Decoder, we go beyond the headlines, from sun-kissed villas drenched in blood to secret betrayals that span two countries. This is the true story of how Scotland's most feared gangsters turned Spain's coast into a killing field. Buckle up. This isn't just another crime story. It's the Costa del Crime, and it's far deadlier than you think. Let's decode the truth to understand how blood spilled on Spain's sunny shores. We first need to trace its roots to the brutal streets of Glasgow. This isn't your typical tale of organized crime. This is a story of war fought in pubs, alleyways, and luxury villas. This is where the Scottish Mafia began its quiet but deadly rise in the late 20th century. Glasgow was a city scarred by poverty, plagued by drug addiction, and ruled by fear. Neighborhoods like Postle Park and Castlemilk weren't just postcodes, they were battle zones. Out of this chaos rose two of Scotland's most feared criminal families. The Lyons and the Daniels. The Lyons were known for their calculated discipline and connections across Europe. The Daniels, on the other hand, brought brute force and boldness. Both families amassed fortunes trafficking heroin and cocaine drugs that flooded the streets and decimated communities. But the Scottish gangs weren't just street-level thugs. They were evolving. And with police pressure mounting at home, the Costa del Sol became more than just a holiday escape. It became a criminal sanctuary. Why Spain? The answer is simple. It had loopholes. Until the late 2000s, Spain lacked an extradition treaty strong enough to quickly deport criminals back to the UK. That legal gray area was paradise for men with blood on their hands by the early 2000s. Glasgow's most violent men were sipping cocktails under palm trees, setting up networks in Marbella, Juice, and Estepona, dubbed by law enforcement as the Costa del Crime. These weren't disorganized brutes. They built multinational operations. Using encrypted phones and burner SIMs, they coordinated shipments of narcotics from Morocco to Spain and from Rotterdam to the UK. Their methods were strategic. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and cash laundering through real estate and luxury cars became the norm. The Scottish Mafia wasn't just keeping up. They were outpacing traditional crime families. They bribed local officials, forged ties with Colombian and Dutch suppliers, and even employed former British soldiers as bodyguards. This wasn't just a gang it was a corporation of chaos. With power came paranoia. Rivalries that began in the dark alleys of Glasgow were now playing out in the Costa's elite neighborhoods. Villas were bombed. Cars were rigged. Men were shot in broad daylight in front of tourists. The feud between the Lyons and the Daniels didn't just survive, the move to Spain intensified. Allies turned enemies. Friends became targets, and so the Costa del Sol transformed. What was once a postcard-perfect coastline became a chessboard of fear. A place where Scottish criminals ran empires and where betrayal was always just a bullet away. It was a warm autumn night in Marbella. 2006. The streets were still, the beaches empty. But behind the luxury villas and the palm-lined roads, something sinister was stirring. At approximately 10:15 p.m., the silence was shattered by the rapid pop-pop-pop of automatic gunfire. Moments later, the lifeless body of Tony McGovern, known Scottish drug dealer, was slumped behind the wheel of his car. He'd been shot at close range, execution style. To some, it seemed like just another gangland killing, but investigators soon realized this was no ordinary hit. This was strategic, brutal, and chillingly efficient. It sent a message. The Costa del Sol was no longer just a retreat, it was a battleground. The killing of Tony McGovern was the first confirmed sign that the turf wars from Scotland had metastasized. The feud between the Lyons and the Daniels, two of Glasgow's most feared gangs, had gone. International McGovern was suspected of leaning toward the Daniels faction. Sources close to Spanish law enforcement claim that surveillance had picked up hints of a hit being planned weeks before. But the precision of the attack stunned everyone. He wasn't followed on foot. He was tracked by high-end vehicles, coordinated through burner phones, and taken out by trained professionals. One forensic analyst would later say, "This wasn't a drive-by. It was a tactical elimination within days." Whispers of retaliation began to surface. And suddenly, Marbella, once a glittering escape for the elite, was engulfed in fear. Business owners kept quiet, locals stayed inside, and tourists. They had no idea that a gangland war had just been declared. What truly shocked Spanish authorities wasn't just the violence, it was the sophistication. These weren't low-level hoodlums. These were experienced gangsters, operating with near-military precision. And they had deep connections across borders, across languages, and across systems. Tony McGovern's murder opened the floodgates. In the months that followed, hits became more frequent, more brazen. Marbella's underworld had awakened, and it wasn't going back to sleep anytime soon. But this was only the beginning. What came next was a series of brutal moves that would expose the true scale of the Scottish Mafia's grip on the Costa del Sol, the deadly game of betrayal, blood, and billions that followed. By the late 2000s, the Scottish Mafia wasn't just fighting for territory. They were building empires. And like all modern empires, these weren't built with bullets alone, but with bank accounts, shell companies, and dirty deals. Here in the Costa del Sol, paradise became profit. Nightclubs turned into fronts. Luxury restaurants became money laundering machines. And villas, once owned by retirees, bought with drug cash and blood money. Using fake companies registered in Gibraltar and the Isle of Man, gang leaders like those from the Lyons and Daniels crews funneled drug money across Europe. The paper trails were faint, but the influence. Impossible to ignore, rumors swirled of bribes to local police, politicians turning a blind eye. Why? Because this wasn't just Scottish crime, it was an economic engine. In a city dependent on tourism and foreign investment, no one wanted to scare off the money, no matter how bloody it was. Fake passports, fake identities, fake investments. But the power, very real. These weren't just gangsters. They were businessmen in designer suits, buying silence, one dirty deal at a time. They moved like ghost legal on paper, invisible in person, and always a step ahead. But the real danger wasn't just the scale of the operation. It was how deep the roots went to law enforcement, city councils, even banking. You'd walk into a bar owned by them and you'd know. Everyone knew, but saying something that could cost you your life at its height. The Scottish Mafia's financial network stretched across 5 continents, moved millions a week, and built an empire stronger than bullets alone could ever achieve. But power always has a price. It was a world wrapped in luxury, guarded by fear and fueled by violence. But no empire built on blood lasts forever. And for the Scottish Mafia, the cracks were beginning to show by the early 2010s. Tensions inside the Scottish syndicates reached a boiling point. Once loyal alliances between the Lyons and Daniels were starting to fracture, whispers of double crosses, failed hits, and secrets being sold to rivals. It was no longer just the police who posed a threat. Was each other in 2013. Spanish National Police, working closely with UK counterparts, finally made their move. A joint raid across Marbella, Fuengirola, and Estepona netted 8 key Scottish suspects, several tied to the Lyons syndicate. But the biggest break came from inside. Multiple gang members turned informants, striking deals for shorter sentences in exchange for evidence. With mounting political pressure from Scotland Yard, Interpol, and Europol, Spain intensified its crackdown in one sweep. Over 4 tons of cocaine, 30 illegal firearms, and millions in laundered euros were seized, cutting deep into the mafia's financial muscle. But every action has a reaction. As law enforcement closed in, the streets ran red. Retaliation hits became frequent. Gangsters accused of snitching were hunted down. And Marbella, once the jewel of the Mediterranean, turned into a war zone at dusk. The Scottish Mafia was bleeding. Not just from arrests, but from fear, betrayal, and a system collapsing under its own corruption. But the real storm was still coming. Just when the Costa del Crime seemed to quiet down, the blood began to flow again. The war wasn't over. It had only gone silent. In November 2016, Ewan E.J. Johnston, a feared enforcer from Glasgow, with known links to organized crime, was assassinated in a professional hit. Though the execution occurred on Scottish soil, its roots stretched straight to the Costa del Sol. The message was clear. Loyalty had its price. And betrayal came with interest. Johnston was reportedly involved in a failed €10 million cocaine shipment that had gone missing. Within weeks, bodies began showing up on both sides of the channel. The pattern was chilling. Victims executed in the same cold, deliberate style, 2 bullets to the chest, 1 to the head. Locals called it El Toque. The Scottish touch retaliation killings became the new currency of fear. Every death was a whisper to the underworld. We haven't forgotten behind the velvet ropes and champagne showers. Deals were being struck. Alliances were shifting. And all the while, the bodies kept piling up. In 2018, Spanish police stormed a villa linked to a Scottish fugitive connected with 5 unsolved murders. Inside, high-end weapons, counterfeit passports, and a list of names, some already dead. The Costa del Sol had become the perfect storm: wealth, sun, and a broken system. As one detective put it, they came for the weather and stayed for the killing. But who were these next-generation players keeping the war alive? In the next segment, we uncover the rise of the new kings of the Costa. Young, digital, and far more dangerous. They wore designer labels instead of leather jackets, Rolexes instead of brass knuckles. But make no mistake, these were killers. And they weren't playing by old rules. In the mid-2010s, a new generation of Scottish gangsters flooded into the Costa del Sol. The old guard had laid the foundation. But these young bloods had a different vision, faster, flashier, and far more ruthless in the old days. A drug deal meant face-to-face meetings in shadowy alleyways or coded phone calls made from public booths. But the new generation of Scottish gangsters brought their business online, and the game changed forever. They called themselves the new Mafia, but their tools were smartphones, emojis, burner accounts, and crypto wallets. No names, no paper trail. It's just virtual connections, built on encrypted whispers and digital smoke behind those glowing screens. Drugs were bought and sold in bulk: cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, all handled like a dark e-commerce operation. Buyers tracked shipments via coded GPS links, payments sent through untraceable Bitcoin mixers, and then there was the flex. These dealers didn't just hide, they flaunted. They posted everything. Poolside selfies in Porto Churro yen, K-shopping sprees in Gucci, late-night clubs flooded in Dom. And always that underlying message: we run this coast. They weaponized social media not just to flaunt wealth, but to recruit new soldiers and intimidate rivals. Every post was a recruitment ad, every story a warning shot. It was criminal entrepreneurship, turned inside out, part drug operation, part influencer campaign. They didn't just live dangerously, it's made a trend, but in their arrogance some slipped. One kingpin was caught after tagging a luxury watch shop in Marbella. Another was tracked through geotags and poolside photos. Their biggest strength: visibility, became their fatal flaw. And as law enforcement quietly watched the stories unfold online, the trap was being set. The Costa wasn't just hosting gangsters anymore, it was becoming a hunting ground. They ruled the algorithm, but could they escape the surveillance? In the next chapter, we explore how these digital dealers turned into cliques, fast and invisible like ghosts in the system, in the dangerous world of the Costa del Crime. There's safety in numbers, but only if those numbers are tight. Real tight. The Scottish Mafia is operating along Spain's sunny coastline, wherein sprawling syndicates with layers of hierarchy. They were cliques: small, loyal, ruthless at first glance. They looked like any other group of young men. Mates from Glasgow or Edinburgh. Fresh-faced, but battle-worn, renting luxury villas under false names. But what made these men deadly wasn't just their pasts, it was how they operated together. Always in 2s or 3s. Never strangers. Never leaks. Each clique had a defined role. The muscle, the front, the logistics, and the cleaner. The cleaner wasn't always the guy with bleach and gloves. He was the one who made problems disappear. They celebrated hard. Nights in Porto, €10 yen bottles, VIP booths, under neon lights. But the closeness that protected them also amplified their paranoia. One wrong look could spark a silent war. The bonds were unbreakable, and till they weren't. And when betrayal came, it was swift, brutal, and surgical. Bodies weren't just dumped, they were erased. No fingerprints, no CCTV, no witnesses. Law enforcement soon realized that the only way to crack these cliques was to break the trust from within. That meant flipping someone. One defection could dismantle an entire network. Raven wasn't a kingpin. He was the errand boy. But when his cousin was found in a suitcase off the A7, he gave it all up. Names, locations, passwords. One leak cracked the code of a clique, and yet, for every clique dismantled, another rises. Because the rule of the Costa remains simple. Trust no one except the ones you die for. Some deaths shake communities. Others shake nations. But a select few reverberate across borders, set not just in headlines, but in the annals of international crime history. In this final subsection, we take you deep into the murders that broke the code of silence and pulled the Costa del Crime out of the shadows. The first body to make the world pause was that of Gerard Gary McNally, known enforcer tied to Glasgow-based underworld and later linked to a high-profile drug operation. His body was found in a burned-out vehicle, wrists zip-tied, a bullet in the back of his skull. Classic execution. Classic message, but it wasn't just McNally. In the span of 18 months, 7 more Scottish men were found dead under suspicious circumstances. 2 were shot outside gyms. 1 was discovered in a canal near Valencia. Another vanished completely, until a bag of bones washed ashore in Alicante. Back home, the murders were more than just statistics. They were devastating ruptures. Families in Scotland were blindsided. Some didn't even know their sons were in Spain, let alone involved in organized crime. The public began asking hard questions. Why were so many Scottish men dying abroad? Why weren't the Spanish authorities solving these crimes? What role did Scotland's own criminal ecosystem play in feeding the Costa del Crime? Eventually, the blood trail became too thick to ignore. Joint investigations between Police Scotland and the Spanish Guardia Civil uncovered encrypted phone data that tied murders in Spain to orders given from prison cells back in Barlini and Sutton. The turning point came with the arrest of Kevin the Butcher McLeod, a suspected fixer behind at least 3 hits. His testimony, under a plea deal, linked the murders to a rogue Scottish cartel operating from the Costa, laundering millions through restaurants, clubs, and real estate deals. While some cases remain unsolved, the reverberations of these murders forced global law enforcement to rethink how they track, map, and dismantle microgangs hiding within expat communities. These weren't just homicides, they were warnings, deaths that echo beyond borders, carry a grim truth. Crime, like power, knows no boundaries. And as the Costa del Crime's grip continues to tighten, one question lingers: who's next on the list? In the sun-soaked serenity of Spain's Costa del Sol, silence now shrouds the memories of bloodshed and betrayal. The Scottish Mafia left a scar that runs deeper than the headlines. But what did we learn, and what remains unsolved? Long after the bodies were buried and the courtrooms emptied, the aftershocks of the Costa del Crime still ripple through both Spain and Scotland. Families remain shattered, questions linger, and in some cases, justice remains elusive. Spanish authorities, aided by Interpol and UK police, crack down hard. But many believe the effort came too late. For years, their intelligence gaps allowed kingpins to move freely, wash money, and build criminal empires in plain sight. Media attention cast a blinding spotlight, sometimes helping investigations, but often sensationalizing events, painting false narratives, and endangering witnesses. There are still unsolved murders, still men unaccounted for, still millions missing. The Mafia's legacy isn't just what they did, but what they took with them when they vanished. Silence may be the loudest answer of all, and now new names are rising. Sons of former gangsters, younger, more ruthless, better funded. The Costa del Sol may have quieted, but Glasgow's underworld is once again stirring. The cycle begins anew. In the end, this story isn't just about murder. It's about power, greed, and the price paid by those who got too close. The Costa del Crime wasn't just a chapter, it was a warning, and now the question is yours to ask. Will we listen this time? Or will the blood on foreign soil be forgotten once again?